Welcome, dear listeners, your passage into a world of mystery, suspense, and classic intrigue. Tonight, we invite you to dim the lights, close the door on the ordinary, and let your imagination board a train bound for danger and deception. Our journey begins aboard the legendary Midnight Express to Marrakesh, racing through the darkened dunes beneath a velvet sky. Among the passengers are the celebrated Belgian detective Hercule Poirot and his loyal companion Captain Hastings. But they are not alone. Every traveler carries a secret, and before dawn breaks over the Moroccan sands, one of them will meet a most mysterious fate. A crime will be committed, and only the keenest of minds will see through the veil of lies. Before we depart, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I always love knowing where our stories reach across the world. And while you're here, share your thoughts. Does this vintage radio style transport you to a golden age of storytelling, or do you prefer our modern tone? Now, the signal hums, the wheels gather speed, and the desert night beckons. Settle in, my friends. This is the Midnight Express to Marrakesh. Chapter 1. The Haunted Railway. The evening air at Tangier station carried an unease that went far beyond the usual pre-departure bustle. It wasn't the clatter of luggage or the echo of hurried steps that caught my attention, but something subtler, a hush that felt almost superstitious. From the moment Poirot and I stepped out of our motor car, I sensed it. The porters who came to collect our trunks exchanged uneasy glances, as if wary of some unseen omen lingering in the air. Our travels from London had been prompted by the Moroccan Archaeological Society, which had graciously invited Monsieur Hercule Poirot to deliver the keynote lecture at their international conference in Marrakesh. His topic, the science of reason in historical investigation, had caused quite a stir even among the most skeptical academics. The Society's president, Professor Al-Mansouri, a dignified gentleman whom Poirot had once aided in recovering stolen relics, had personally requested his attendance. For my part, I was delighted to accompany my friend, glad to trade London's grey chill for the promise of Moroccan warmth and desert stars. The voyage by sea had been uneventful, even charming, but this platform, bathed in the eerie glow of gas lamps, whispered of something far less tranquil. "Do you see that, Hastings?" Poirot murmured, his keen eyes sweeping over the station. One of the porters, having just deposited our cases, discreetly traced a sign of protection over his chest before hurrying off. Poirot's brow lifted. "A gesture against evil spirits, mon ami. How curious, n'est-ce pas?" Before I could reply, a woman in a dark travel coat brushed past us, clutching her handbag so tightly that her knuckles blanched. Her lips moved soundlessly, and though I could not hear her words, I recognized the rhythm of a whispered prayer. She cast one final, fearful look at the waiting train, the fabled Midnight Express to Marrakesh. "Superstitious locals," I muttered under my breath. Poirot only smiled, stroking his immaculate mustache, a sign I knew well. It meant he had already observed something I had entirely missed. A thin man in a crisp conductor's uniform appeared before us, his features carved by years of wind and travel. "Your compartments are prepared, messieurs, numbers 12 and 14, he announced curtly. The nameplate on his chest read Jacques Merrier, and his tone was as cold as a January gust along the Channel. Poirot responded with polite civility, presenting our tickets with a small bow. Merrier barely nodded before disappearing into the shadows. "Charming fellow," I remarked dryly as we boarded. Inside, the train was quieter than I had expected. Only a handful of passengers occupied the first-class coaches, perhaps a dozen in total, when there ought to have been 4 times as many. The Midnight Express had long been celebrated for its luxury and prestige, yet tonight it felt deserted. The dining car, usually lively with conversation, stood empty but for the faint rattle of cutlery as the train shifted. Our compartments were comfortable, furnished with polished mahogany and deep leather seats. Once settled, I found Poirot gazing out at the mist-shrouded platform, his expression unreadable. The station clock struck 9. In half an hour, we would be on our way across the desert. It was then that a voice, calm and refined, spoke behind us. "Pardon me, gentlemen. You are bound for the Marrakesh conference, I believe." The speaker was a tall man of about 50, his silver hair framing a face both intelligent and kind. His attire, though slightly rumpled, was unmistakably that of a gentleman. "You are Monsieur Hercule Poirot, are you not? I recognized you at once. My name is Cyril Montrose, publisher by trade, though I dabble in archaeology from the comfort of my office." Poirot inclined his head. "Enchanté, Monsieur Montrose. And you too travel to Marrakesh?" "Yes, though not for pleasure," Montrose replied, his smile dimming. "One of my authors is aboard, Miss Octavia Wentworth. You may know her novels. She was once quite famous, though ill health has kept her from writing of late. She insisted on making this journey, despite her condition. Her doctor and nurse accompany her, and her daughter joined us at the last stop. It has been a difficult trip." His tone carried genuine sorrow, the sort that invites empathy rather than curiosity. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "Ah, the poor lady. I hope she is not in great pain." "She sleeps now." Montrose sighed. "Dr. Stratford manages her suffering with morphine, though at times the relief is fleeting. Forgive me, I shouldn't trouble you with such details. I only mention it because Mrs. Wentworth can be rather expressive when the pain grows too sharp. You may hear her in the night." Before I could reply, the sharp cry of the whistle cut through the gloom. The train shuddered, then began to move. Steam curled upward into the night as Tangier faded into darkness behind us. Poirot settled into his seat, eyes gleaming with quiet anticipation. "Mon ami," he said softly, "sometimes the most curious mysteries begin with silence, and a train half full." I smiled, unaware of just how prophetic those words would soon prove to be. The midnight express to Marrakesh had begun its journey, and with it a shadowed tale neither of us could yet imagine. Sleep came easily aboard the midnight express, lulled by the steady rhythm of the wheels against the rails. I drifted into a dreamless haze until a scream tore through the night, shrill and human, an unmistakable cry of terror. I was upright in an instant, fumbling for my dressing gown, my heart hammering in my chest. The corridor outside my compartment was ablaze with light. Doors stood open, passengers stumbled out in confusion, and fearful murmurs filled the narrow space. Poirot was already there, immaculately dressed as though he had been awaiting the call. How the man managed such miraculous readiness, I could never understand. "Compartment 7, he said calmly, his eyes already fixed on the source of the commotion. We pushed our way through the growing crowd. At the door of the compartment stood a nurse, pale as paper, one trembling hand pressed to her throat. The sight beyond her froze me in place. A woman lay motionless on the narrow berth, the lamplight soft upon her still face. The air smelled faintly of lavender and morphine. Poirot brushed past the nurse with quiet authority, and I followed him in. The compartment bore the marks of a wealthy traveller, a leather trunk embossed with initials, a silk scarf draped over the armchair, and a half-finished book lying face down on the table. But it was the woman who held our attention. Her silver hair framed a face that, even in death, retained dignity and calm. Her hands were folded neatly across her chest. On the carpet beside the bed, a syringe glimmered ominously. "She's gone," the nurse whispered, her voice brittle. "Mrs. Wentworth. I checked on her at 11. She was resting comfortably." Her eyes filled with disbelief. "She's dead." Footsteps thundered down the corridor, and a tall man entered, his presence unmistakably professional. He carried a black leather bag, and his expression was one of grim recognition. "Good heavens, Octavia," he breathed, kneeling beside the body. His practiced fingers found the pulse point, lingered, and then withdrew. "She's been dead for some time, perhaps 3 hours. Midnight, I should think." Poirot inclined his head. "You are Dr. Stratford, yes?" The physician looked up sharply. "That's right. I've been treating Mrs. Wentworth for 6 months. Terminal cancer. Morphine kept her comfortable, though I monitored every dose carefully." His gaze shifted toward the syringe on the floor. "That is not one of mine," he said, his voice darkening. "This wasn't part of my treatment schedule." Before Poirot could respond, 2 more figures appeared at the door. Cyril Montrose, the kindly publisher we had met earlier, clutched the frame for support, his face ashen. Behind him stood a young woman, impeccably dressed in navy blue, her features eerily composed. "Mother," she said softly, her tone curiously devoid of emotion. I knew at once this must be Evangeline Wentworth, the dying woman's daughter. Dr. Stratford straightened. "Miss Wentworth, I'm so very sorry. Your mother has passed away." Evangeline's expression barely shifted. Her eyes glimmered like polished glass. "Thank you, doctor," she murmured, and then fell silent. Poirot, watching her keenly, noted every detail: the rigid poise, the whitened knuckles clutching her handbag, the faint tremor in her left hand. "This compartment must remain sealed," Dr. Stratford declared. "I believe this was not a natural death." His hesitation carried weight. A soft gasp escaped Montrose, who sank into a seat in the corridor, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders trembled as though struggling against an invisible grief. From farther down the train came a whisper in Arabic, low, fearful. Another voice answered louder. "The curse! The train is cursed! 3 deaths in 6 months!" The murmur spread like fire through dry grass. Poirot stood motionless amid the panic, his sharp eyes darting from one detail to the next. The syringe, the open morphine case on the table, the faint scratches around its lock, the window latch slightly ajar. He bent, examining the dead woman's expression, peaceful, almost serene. Then, straightening, he turned to address the onlookers. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying the authority of quiet certainty. "I am Hercule Poirot. Some of you may know the name. I must ask that no one leaves this train. The body will be preserved in the refrigerated carriage, and from this moment, no detail, no gesture, must escape my attention. We travel onward to Marrakesh, but before we arrive, la vérité shall be known." The conductor, Jacques Merrier, appeared, his face drawn tight. Poirot spoke to him quickly in French, and the man nodded, disappearing down the corridor. Moments later, he returned with Dr. Stratford, and together they lifted Mrs. Wentworth's body with care and solemnity. Poirot watched in silence, his mind recording every nuance, the stillness of the hands, the precise angle of the discarded syringe, the peculiar indentation on the pillow near her head. When they were gone, the 5 of us remained: Poirot, myself, Dr. Stratford clutching his medical bag, the trembling nurse Miss Chambers, the broken Montrose, and the silent daughter whose calm unsettled me more than any grief could. The train rattled onward into the Moroccan night, its steady rhythm masking the dread that hung in the air. Somewhere beyond the sands, Marrakesh awaited. But I could not shake the feeling that what had begun here, in compartment 7, would haunt us long before we reached our journey's end. Chapter 2. The Tangled Web of Relations. Dawn crept gently over the Moroccan desert, bathing the dunes in hues of amber and rose. It should have been a scene of tranquil beauty, yet the serenity felt misplaced, mocking even. No one aboard the Midnight Express to Marrakesh slept soundly after the night's events. I myself had spent the long hours pacing, haunted by the image of Mrs. Wentworth's serene face and by Poirot's quiet declaration, "This was no accident." When we entered the dining car at 8 o'clock, an oppressive stillness lingered, heavy as desert heat before a storm. Conversation was scarce and cautious. The uninvolved passengers clustered at the far end, whispering in uneasy tones, while the four central figures in the tragedy, Dr. Stratford, Miss Chambers, Mr. Montrose and Miss Evangeline Wentworth, occupied separate tables. Each sat alone, wrapped in thought, a small island of guilt or grief, or both. Poirot surveyed the scene with a look of almost clinical satisfaction. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "A drama upon the stage. The actors are ready. The play begins." He selected a table at the center, ordered coffee and croissants, and beckoned the conductor with a subtle gesture. "Monsieur Merrier, be so kind as to ask Dr. Stratford to join us first." The conductor's face betrayed reluctance, but obedience prevailed. Moments later, Dr. Malcolm Stratford appeared, looking older in the morning light. Lines of exhaustion etched his face. The grey in his hair seemed more pronounced, yet he carried himself with the dignity of a man accustomed to duty. He placed his medical bag carefully beside him before meeting Poirot's gaze. "You administered morphine to Mrs. Wentworth at 9 o'clock?" Poirot began without preamble. "Yes," Stratford replied, his voice clipped. "A standard dose, 5 milligrams, enough to ease her pain, not enough to harm her." "You recorded this, naturally?" Stratford withdrew a small, leather-bound logbook and laid it open. The entries were neat and meticulous, each note timed and measured. Poirot's eyes moved down the columns approvingly. "Très bien, a man of order," he murmured. "At 10:30, you checked on her again." "She was resting peacefully," Stratford said, "her breathing steady. I intended to return at midnight. That has been my habit for years." "But you did not," Poirot said gently. "You were seen in the observation car." The doctor's lips thinned. "Yes, I needed air. I was there from 11 until after midnight. Several passengers can confirm that. Watching her decline day by day, it wears one down." Poirot nodded, jotting a brief note in his pocketbook. "The morphine case," he continued. "Its lock was damaged. Someone forced it open." "That's impossible," Stratford replied quickly. "I had the key with me all evening." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "someone did, mon ami." For a long moment, silence held between them. I saw a flicker in the doctor's expression. Pain, perhaps, rather than guilt. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You cared for Mrs. Wentworth? More than as a physician, I think." A flush crept up Stratford's neck. "I respected her deeply. She was brilliant, resilient. After 20 years of professional care, friendship develops naturally. Is that so strange?" "Not strange," Poirot said. "Only interesting." The doctor rose abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "If you imply something improper—" Poirot raised a hand. "I imply nothing. I observe only that emotion clouds even the clearest judgment. Sit, doctor. It is not accusation, merely human nature." Stratford hesitated, then sat once more, his anger cooling into sorrow. "She was extraordinary," he said quietly. Even in her final weeks, she retained her humor and dignity. The world is smaller without her. Poirot inclined his head in silent acknowledgement. Merci, docteur. You may go. As Stratford withdrew, the conductor returned, escorting the nurse. Miss Prudence Chambers was a woman of about 35, competent in bearing but visibly shaken. Her starched uniform was immaculate despite the sleepless night, though her trembling hands betrayed her nerves. Poirot greeted her with courtesy, pouring her a cup of tea himself. "You discovered the body," Poirot said. "Yes," she replied evenly. "I check on patients every 2 hours. At 1 o'clock, I entered her compartment and found her cold. No pulse, no breath. The syringe was on the floor and the morphine case open. I knew something was terribly wrong, so I raised the alarm immediately." "Very proper," Poirot said approvingly. "You had been in Mrs. Wentworth's service for how long?" 3 months. Dr. Stratford hired me when her health declined and she required constant supervision." "And before that?" Her fingers tightened around the teacup. "St. Margaret's Hospital in London," she said. "Then various private engagements across Europe." "Your references are satisfactory, of course," Poirot remarked mildly. "Yes," she said quickly, but her eyes dropped, refusing to meet his. The silence that followed was deliberate, almost cruel. Poirot let it linger just long enough for discomfort to bloom. There was something in the nurse's guarded tone, a secret crouched behind her professionalism, that told me Poirot had already marked her as a piece of the puzzle. He leaned back, eyes half closed in thought, and the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels filled the silence once more. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long, golden spears of light across the dunes. Within, beneath the polished brass and velvet, suspicion gathered like storm clouds. The morning sun slanted through the train's windows, spilling gold across the polished tables of the dining car. Outside, the Moroccan desert stretched endlessly, beautiful, empty, and silent. Inside, tension simmered beneath the soft clatter of china and silver. Each suspect sat isolated, pretending calm, yet their eyes flickered constantly toward Poirot. The detective seemed almost serene, his hands folded neatly beside his cup, but I knew better. That stillness was the mask he wore when his mind was racing. "Each of them hides something," Poirot murmured at last, watching the reflection of the passengers in the glass. "But which secret conceals murder, Hastings? That is what we must discover." I nodded, glancing toward Miss Prudence Chambers, who sat rigidly at her table, a half-eaten croissant untouched before her. She looked like a woman wound too tightly, ready to snap. Poirot followed my gaze. "Fear, Hastings," he said softly. "It can tell us much. There is guilt in fear, but not always the guilt of crime." Before I could reply, the conductor appeared once more, his hat clutched nervously in his hands. "Monsieur Poirot, the inspector from the Tangier police will meet the train at the next stop," he informed us. Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Mercier. Until then, we continue our own little inquiry." He rose and approached Miss Chambers. "Mademoiselle," he began with courtly politeness, "you were devoted to Madame Wentworth, were you not?" The nurse hesitated. "Of course, she was my patient." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but you cared for her beyond mere duty. You sat at her bedside through the long nights, tended her every need, shared her confidences, perhaps." Color drained from her face. "She spoke often of her daughter," she said finally, her voice trembling. "How she longed to see her again but doubted she ever would. It broke her heart." Poirot nodded, eyes glinting. "And yet, Mademoiselle Evangeline returned. Curious timing, is it not? When death draws near, those estranged seem always to appear." Miss Chambers' hands twisted the napkin in her lap. I don't know what you're implying." "Implying, mademoiselle?" Poirot smiled. No, I merely observe." As the nurse retreated, Evangeline Wentworth's cool gaze met ours from across the car. She rose with slow, deliberate grace and walked toward us. Every eye followed her. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone calm but her fingers tightening around the handle of her bag. "You suspect me of something, Poirot gestured for her to sit. "I suspect, madame, that your heart is well trained to reveal nothing. And yet, repression is often more dangerous than passion." "My mother and I disagreed, yes," Evangeline replied evenly. "But I did not kill her. I came to make peace. Ask anyone. I was alone all evening." Poirot leaned forward. "Alone?" "A curious word, madame. Sometimes the murderer is most alone of all." She met his gaze steadily for several seconds before standing. "I have nothing more to say." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. When she was gone, I exhaled. "Good heavens, Poirot, she's a cold one. I'd wager my life she's hiding something." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Perhaps, mon ami. But coldness can also be armor, not guilt." He paused. "No, the truth lies in the details, the little inconsistencies, the unguarded moments. Did you notice, Hastings, that the nurse trembled when speaking of the morphine, but the daughter did not even flinch when recalling her mother's death? Each mask is different, but both conceal something." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cyril Montrose, his face drawn and pale. "Monsieur Poirot," he began hoarsely, "I've just remembered something. Last night, before I went to the club car, I passed Mrs. Wentworth's door. I heard voices inside, hers and another woman's. It was faint, but there was definite anger in the tone." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "At what time, precisely?" "Close to 10:30. "Merci, Monsieur Montrose. You have been most helpful." When he departed, Poirot leaned back, thoughtful. 10:30, the time when Dr. Stratford claims to have checked on his patient, n'est-ce pas? Yet he heard nothing. Fascinating. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels filled the silence between us. Poirot stared out at the vast dunes, his reflection framed by golden light. "Murder, Hastings," he said softly, "is rarely born of hatred alone. It is often the offspring of pride, or love." I followed his gaze toward the distant horizon. The desert shimmered under the morning sun, endless and unforgiving, like truth itself. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Sleeping Cars. The desert unrolled endlessly beyond the train windows, a sea of gold and shadow beneath a sky so brilliant it seemed to burn the eyes. Inside, the midnight express to Marrakesh hummed steadily onward, its rhythm both soothing and ominous. Poirot spent the better part of the morning performing what he grandly called the examination of the tangible evidence. In practice, this meant that I stood by awkwardly while he scrutinized every corner of Mrs. Octavia Wentworth's compartment, peering through his magnifying glass and muttering a stream of French so rapid I caught only every third word. By mid-afternoon, as the heat shimmered outside and the air inside the carriage turned thick and still, he finally straightened, his grey eyes sharp with decision. "Come, Hastings," he said. "We must pay our respects to Madame Wentworth once more, this time in her final resting place." The conductor, Monsieur Méliès, guided us through the service corridors passengers rarely glimpsed, past the galley, where the rich aroma of Moroccan spices mingled with roasting meat, and onward through narrow, echoing passageways until we reached the refrigerated storage compartment. The moment we stepped inside, a biting chill enveloped us. It was a startling contrast to the desert inferno beyond the carriage walls. Mrs. Wentworth lay upon a narrow bier, covered by a simple white sheet. Poirot drew it back with the tenderness of a priest unveiling a relic. Her face, pale and serene in death, held not the faintest trace of terror or pain, only a haunting calm. "You see, mon ami," Poirot said quietly, "she met death without fear. Either she was deep in slumber, or she trusted the hand that gave her death." He bent close, examining the crook of her arm. "Regardez, Hastings, a puncture, recent perhaps within hours of death. The mark was nearly invisible, a mere shadow on the skin. Dr. Stratford administered morphine at 9 o'clock, Poirot continued, yet she died more than 2 hours later. This," he tapped the mark gently with his gloved finger, "suggests another injection, far closer to the time she breathed her last." I felt a shiver unrelated to the cold. Then someone returned after the doctor left, someone she knew well enough not to resist. "Precisely," Poirot murmured, replacing the sheet with quiet respect. "A murder of opportunity, but also of intimacy." We made our way back through the narrow halls, the clatter of lunch service resuming in the dining car. Waiters moved briskly past with trays of gleaming silver and steaming plates, but Poirot waved away any offer of refreshment. "Later, perhaps," he said. "For now, we dine upon evidence." With some reluctance, Méliès handed over the master key. One by one, we entered the suspects' compartments. Miss Chambers's compartment, number 9, was orderly, almost ascetic. A single travelling case rested neatly by the bed, her nurse's uniform pressed and hanging in the wardrobe. On the small side table lay a prayer book, worn soft from years of devotion. When Poirot opened it, a cascade of pressed flowers fell out, roses, lilies, forget-me-nots, each carefully labelled with date and place. Paris, 1923, Rome, 1924, Vienna, 1925. "A sentimental creature, our Miss Chambers," Poirot mused, "a woman of faith, and perhaps of regret." But beneath the prayer book, folded so small it might have been overlooked, was a letter. Poirot unfolded it delicately and read in silence, his eyebrows lifting. "Dismissal from St. Margaret's Hospital," he murmured, "for conduct unbecoming and, inappropriate personal relationships. How most inconvenient for a lady whose virtue is her livelihood." He tucked the letter back where it belonged. "We disturb nothing, Hastings. Observation, not interference. That is the method of Poirot." Dr. Stratford's compartment, number 6, told another story altogether. Shelves lined with medical journals, notebooks, and clinical reports spoke of a man devoted to precision and science. His black medical bag sat open on the chair, gleaming instruments neatly arranged within. But it was not the tools that caught Poirot's attention. It was a photograph tucked into a copy of The Lancet. He drew it out and examined it under the lamplight. Octavia Wentworth, younger, radiant, caught mid-laughter beside a garden hedge. On the back, written in an elegant hand, "To Malcolm, who sees me as I truly am. With affection, Octavia." I whistled. "Well, that certainly doesn't sound professional." Poirot smiled thinly. "Non, mon ami, it seems our esteemed physician's concern for his patient was not purely medical." Finally, we reached the luxurious compartment of Miss Evangeline Wentworth, number 15. Her cabin was a study in opulence. Silk gowns draped across the seat, velvet pouches of jewelry arranged with care, perfume bottles glittering in the light. Yet it was not vanity that drew Poirot's gaze. It was a bundle of unsent letters hidden within a hat box. Each began the same way. To Mother. None had ever been posted. Poirot read several silently before selecting one to read aloud. "You cast me out for choosing love over money," it began. "Yet your own marriage was one of convenience, not affection. You write stories of romance, but you know nothing of love." Poirot closed the letter and sighed. "A child's anger, yes, but beneath it, pain. Pain so deep it festers." He examined the remaining letters until his gaze stopped on the final one, written only 3 days before the journey began. The tone began in fury, accusations, resentment, words meant to wound, but ended in something desperate and raw. "I am coming to you. You will listen this time. I deserve what is rightfully mine." I swallowed hard. She knew about the will then? "Indeed," Poirot replied softly, "and she meant to confront her mother before the journey's end. But Hastings, someone ensured that confrontation would never take place." He closed the hatbox, his reflection glimmering faintly in the polished lid. The rhythmic hum of the train filled the silence between us, like the pulse of some great mechanical heart driving us ever closer to the truth. Poirot closed the final letter from Evangeline Wentworth and tapped it thoughtfully against his chin. "She knew her mother had disinherited her," he murmured, "and 3 days later she conveniently boards the train at Casablanca. Quelle coincidence, Hastings. The timing is too elegant to ignore." We left her perfumed compartment behind and made our way down the narrow passage to number 12, the domain of Cyril Montrose, the late Mrs. Wentworth's publisher. His cabin was less a resting place and more a mobile office. Piles of manuscripts littered every surface, pages covered in red ink notes and revisions. A portable typewriter occupied the desk, a half-finished letter still in its roller. Poirot bent closer, reading the page aloud in a soft voice. It was a condolence letter addressed to Evangeline Wentworth, offering sympathy for her mother's death and promising to see that her final manuscript received the recognition it deserved. The tone was compassionate, respectful, a man grieving both a friend and a professional partner. Yet Poirot's eyes, sharp and discerning, were already moving past the letter to the chaos beneath. He found a locked briefcase half hidden under a stack of papers. "Aha," he said with a faint smile. "A publisher's true secrets are never bound in books." With surprising dexterity, he coaxed open the lock using a small pin from his pocket. Inside lay a trove of financial ledgers, bank letters and contracts, each one more troubling than the last. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, flipping through the papers. "Montrose and Sons is not merely in difficulty, it is drowning." The numbers told a grim tale. $30,000 in debt, unpaid advances, creditors threatening foreclosure. Worse still were the letters, pleas for extensions, ignored invoices, and mounting interest. But one folder in particular made Poirot's expression darken. Inside were contracts dated just 2 weeks before Mrs. Wentworth's death, agreements with newspapers and magazines for the exclusive serialization rights to her final novel. There were also preliminary deals for international publishing, even early negotiations for film adaptation, all contingent upon a single condition: publication following the author's death. "He prepared all this before she died," I said, a chill running through me. "Indeed," Poirot replied quietly. "He claimed affection, loyalty, admiration, but I see calculation, precision. Perhaps he was merely planning for the inevitable." His voice drifted. Or perhaps he gave fate a little push. He replaced the papers with meticulous care. His gaze lingered briefly on the elegant fountain pen resting beside the typewriter. A beautiful instrument, silver and engraved with Montrose's initials. Poirot turned it between his fingers, examining the nib. Then, as if satisfied, he set it down again. "What is it?" I asked. "Did you find something important?" "Perhaps, Hastings," he said, eyes distant. "Or perhaps I merely confirm what I already feared." We left the publisher's compartment and made our way forward toward the roar and vibration of the locomotive. The air grew hotter and thicker until we reached the engine car, a world of noise and motion. There, at the controls, stood Louis Garnier, the stoic train driver, his face half hidden beneath soot and sweat. "Monsieur Garnier," Poirot began, raising his voice above the din, "we wish to ask you about certain unfortunate incidents aboard this train." "I drive," Garnier said flatly, his accent rough and curt. "That is all I do." Poirot's tone softened. "Over the past 6 months, 3 deaths have occurred on your route. A businessman, an elderly woman, a passenger who fell from the observation car, and in each case, you were driving." The driver's expression didn't change. "I drive every journey. It's my line." Poirot regarded him silently. Then he said, "Passenger numbers have fallen, have they not? The train emptier each month?" For the first time, Garnier's eyes flickered. "Fewer people, fewer problems," he muttered. "Less noise. I prefer it." "You prefer solitude?" Poirot asked gently. "I prefer peace." Poirot studied the man, the grease-stained hands gripping the controls, the hollow eyes fixed on the rails. "A misanthrope," he murmured to me later. "A man alone at the heart of a machine designed to bring people together." He asked one final question. "And these whispers of a curse upon the train, you have heard them, n'est-ce pas?" Garnier's mouth tightened. "Foolish stories. People see patterns where there are none." Yet his hands clenched slightly on the throttle, and his jaw twitched in a way that betrayed unease. Poirot said no more. He simply nodded and left the man to his engines. Back in his compartment, Poirot sank into his seat, fingers steepled beneath his chin. I recognized that posture. It meant his mind was turning with quiet ferocity. 4 suspects, he said slowly, each concealing something, each capable of deception, but only one with what appears to be a perfect alibi. "Montrose," I said quickly. "He was in the club car, surrounded by witnesses. They all saw him there." "Ah, Hastings," Poirot sighed. "But they saw what he wished them to see. 3 witnesses confirm his presence between 10 and midnight. Yet Madame Wentworth died at approximately 11:30, after the morphine was altered. The question is not where he was seen, but when the act was done." He opened his notebook and pointed to a series of times neatly written in his tidy script. "The conductor made his final round at 8:45, our victim alive and comfortable. Dr. Stratford gave the injection at 9. By 11:30, she was dead. Somewhere between those moments, the fatal dose was administered, and that, mon ami, is the fulcrum upon which the entire truth balances." Outside, the barren desert began to change. Scrubland dotted the horizon, signaling the approach of Marrakesh. By morning, the local authorities would take control of the investigation. But Poirot, ever the perfectionist, was not yet satisfied. He rose, straightening his tie with crisp precision. "Come, Hastings," he said briskly. "There is one more piece of evidence we have yet to examine." I blinked. "What evidence?" "The morphine case itself," he replied, "and the curious scratches around its lock. For I am beginning to suspect, my dear friend, that nothing aboard this train is precisely what it seems." Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The desert night had begun to swallow the horizon when the dining car came alive with light. Crystal glasses caught the glow of the lamps, gleaming against immaculate white tablecloths, while beyond the windows stretched an endless sea of shadow and sand. Civilization, it seemed, was hurtling through the wilderness at 40 miles an hour. Poirot had chosen the arrangement with his usual precision. 4 chairs, 4 suspects, and a single table set like a stage. Each seat was placed so that no one could leave unnoticed, and yet each had a clear view of the others. I took my position just behind him, my notebook open but my pen still. I knew instinctively that what was about to unfold would imprint itself in memory far more vividly than ink ever could. They entered one by one. Miss Chambers arrived first, now without her nurse's uniform. Her grey dress was modest, but it did nothing to hide the deep fear in her eyes. Dr. Stratford followed, his ever-present medical bag conspicuously missing. His shoulders were rigid, his expression that of a man bracing for an invisible blow. Then came Evangeline Wentworth, moving with disconcerting grace. She greeted everyone as though this were an evening soirée rather than an inquest into her mother's death. And finally, Sir Cyril Montrose appeared, his face pale and hollow, grief carving fresh lines across his already aged features. "Thank you for joining me," Poirot began, his tone as courteous as if he were addressing a royal dinner. "We shall dine, and we shall speak of murder." The waiter served bowls of harira, fragrant with lentils and lamb, but none of the guests touched their spoons. The rhythmic sway of the train caused the lamps to flicker, shadows slipping across their faces like masks. Poirot turned his sharp gaze upon Miss Wentworth. "Mademoiselle, you boarded this train carrying a letter, one written in great anger toward your mother, did you not?" Her composure faltered for the first time. I was upset. She left everything to charity. I was her only daughter and she gave me nothing. Is it truly so wicked to want what should be mine?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Wicked? Perhaps not, but such disappointment can drive one to desperate ends. A motive most potent." Her fingers shook as she reached for her glass. "I burned that letter. I regretted it the moment it was written. It never left my compartment." "You burned it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet interest. "Curious, for the letter found in your mother's compartment was burnt too, and written on the very same paper, in the same hand." Evangeline's color drained. "That's impossible. I never went near her compartment. I was writing a new letter, a kinder one, when she died." "Ah, yes," said Poirot softly, "a letter that no one has seen. How convenient." Before she could respond, Dr. Stratford interjected, his voice rising with sudden indignation. "Surely you don't suspect her, Poirot. She knows nothing of medicine or morphine. Such precision requires expertise, my expertise." Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "Indeed. Administering a fatal dose requires knowledge of dosage and timing, and you, doctor, possess both." Stratford's jaw tightened. "I've already explained my whereabouts. I was in the observation car from 11 until after midnight. Many passengers can confirm this." Poirot consulted his small notebook. "The Thompsons retired at 11:15. The businessmen from Manchester stepped out for a smoke at 20 past and did not return for half an hour. For a brief window, doctor, you were alone. That doesn't mean I went to Octavia's compartment. Yet the conductor saw you in the sleeping corridor at 11:25. "I was looking for the lavatory," he snapped. "There is one in the observation car," Poirot said mildly. "Why walk through the entire train?" Stratford hesitated. The air was thick with smoke. I needed to breathe. Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. "So, in your search for air, you passed directly by compartment 7, where Mrs. Wentworth lay dying. An unfortunate coincidence, perhaps?" The doctor's hands gripped the tablecloth. "You twist everything I say. Yes, I loved her. There, I've said it. But I would never harm her. I spent years fighting to ease her pain, not hasten it. Do you know what it is to watch someone you love fade away before your eyes?" His voice cracked, raw with emotion. The dining car was silent, except for the hum of the wheels beneath them. Even Poirot, though unmoved in expression, regarded him with the faintest shadow of pity. Miss Chambers reached across the table, her voice trembling as she clasped Dr. Stratford's hand. "He's a good man," she said softly. "Whatever affection he may have held for Mrs. Wentworth, he would never betray his oath as a physician." Poirot tilted his head, studying her with interest. "You defend him with admirable conviction, mademoiselle. Yet I wonder, is it loyalty that speaks, or guilt?" The nurse froze. Her fingers slipped from the doctor's hand, as though the touch burned. "I don't understand what you mean." "Ah, but I think you do," said Poirot gently, his tone almost kind. "St. Margaret's Hospital, your dismissal for conduct unbecoming. A rather delicate phrase, yes? One that conceals much behind polite words. An inappropriate attachment to a man involved in your patient's care, perhaps?" A flush of scarlet spread across her cheeks. "That was a misunderstanding. I did nothing wrong." "Then why falsify your references?" Poirot asked quietly. "Why conceal your past when you sought employment under Dr. Stratford?" Her voice broke. "Because no one would hire a nurse with that stain on her record. I needed the position. I needed to prove that I could still do my work." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Mrs. Wentworth was kind to me. I prayed for her recovery every night. I would never have hurt her." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained measured. "Perhaps not. Yet you too had access to the morphine. You understood the dosage, the schedule, the method." "So did the doctor," she countered through her tears. "So did anyone who watched our routine." Poirot's gaze turned to the one man who had remained silent, Sir Cyril Montrose. The publisher's posture was rigid, his face pale and drawn. "And you, Monsieur Montrose," said Poirot, "you have listened patiently, but you have not spoken. Why so quiet?" Montrose raised weary eyes. "What is there left to say? You have stripped us all bare. Shall you expose my sins as well?" Poirot's voice was almost apologetic. "Your publishing house, I believe, is on the brink of ruin. £30,000 in debt, creditors growing restless." Montrose nodded, his voice flat. "I made foolish investments. The market changed and I didn't adapt. Octavia knew this. She was considering a loan." "Or," Poirot interjected, "she was considering taking her new manuscript elsewhere." The publisher's composure cracked. "No, she would never abandon me. Octavia was loyal. She knew her next novel could save my firm. And now—" He hesitated, his voice catching. "Now, her death has made her name more valuable than ever. The publicity will ensure the book's success. Even the serialization rights will clear most of my debt." "How fortunate," murmured Poirot, "that you arranged those rights before her death." "She was dying," Montrose burst out. "Her condition was terminal. Was I supposed to let everything collapse while I waited for the inevitable? I loved her work. I loved her friendship. I only planned for what must come." He looked around the table, desperation in his eyes. "Is that so wrong?" "It gives you motive," Poirot said evenly. "As do the debts, the daughter's inheritance, the doctor's forbidden love, and the nurse's tarnished past." Montrose's voice rose, strained with anger. "Then we are all guilty, are we not? The daughter who stood to gain her mother's fortune, the doctor who could not let go, the nurse who feared exposure, and I, the publisher who needed salvation. Each of us benefited, each of us had reason, but reason is not guilt. I was in the club car from 10 until midnight. Ask the Thompsons, ask the Manchester men, they will tell you." "Indeed," Poirot replied, tapping his notebook. "All confirm your presence." "Then there is nothing more to say," Montrose declared. "I may be ruined, Monsieur Poirot, but I am not a murderer." His voice echoed through the dining car, filled with such raw emotion that even I, trained to be objective, felt a pang of sympathy. This was a man broken by both grief and circumstance. Poirot leaned back, fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. "So we have before us 4 figures, a daughter with wounded pride and a vanished letter, a doctor with his dangerous devotion, a nurse with a past she must conceal, and a publisher staring down ruin. Each with a motive, each with opportunity." He paused, his gaze sweeping across their drawn faces. "And yet," he said softly, "there is something else, something darker. For Mrs. Wentworth's death is not an isolated act. There are others. The businessman, the woman who fell from the observation platform, the elderly man found lifeless in his seat. What binds them, I wonder?" "The curse," whispered Miss Chambers. "They say this train is cursed." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, mademoiselle, there are no such things as curses. But plots, schemes, conspiracies, those are very real indeed." Evangeline Wentworth leaned forward, eyes wide. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Poirot replied, rising to his feet, "that tomorrow, upon our arrival in Marrakesh, I shall assemble everyone, passengers, crew, and suspects alike, and reveal not one truth, but 2. Who killed Octavia Wentworth, and what sinister pattern has haunted this train for 6 long months." He adjusted his cuffs and gave a slight bow. "Until then, I suggest you rest. Tomorrow the performance ends, and reality takes its bow." The suspects rose one by one, retreating into the dim corridors, each burdened by their own fears. When the car was empty, I turned to my friend. "You've solved it, haven't you, Poirot?" I asked quietly. He smiled, that small, knowing smile that meant the pieces had fallen neatly into place. "I know many things, Hastings. I know that appearances deceive, that guilt often wears the face of love, and that mercy, when twisted, can become the cruelest motive of all." "And the killer?" "Patience, mon ami," he murmured. "Tomorrow you shall see how the little grey cells restore order to chaos. The truth will come, as it always does." The train rolled onward through the darkness, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels carrying us closer to Marrakesh and to the reckoning that awaited in the light of morning. Chapter 5. The Web of Deception. The first rays of morning painted the Atlas Mountains in shimmering gold, casting long shadows across the desert. The Marrakesh Express barreled steadily toward its destination, the city now only an hour away. Inside the train, a dramatic transformation had occurred. The dining car was stripped of its usual tables and ornate fittings, replaced with a semicircle of chairs, a stage set for the final act of Poirot's meticulous investigation. The suspects and passengers assembled as instructed, the tension in the air almost tangible. In the front row sat the 4 individuals whose lives and secrets had been under the microscope. Miss Chambers, Dr. Stratford, Evangeline Wentworth, and Sir Cyril Montrose. Each maintained a careful, almost wary distance from the others, while behind them the rest of the passengers, the Thompsons, the Manchester businessman, and a quiet French couple, observed in hushed anticipation. Louis Garnier lingered off to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, a sentinel amid the growing apprehension. Near the door, Conductor Méliès stood ready to summon the authorities upon the train's arrival, the weight of imminent revelation pressing down on everyone present. Poirot stepped forward, immaculate in his morning attire, his waxed moustaches curving precisely as always. "Mesdames et messieurs, today we confront not one, but several deaths," he began. "The gentleman who passed from a heart condition, The lady who fell from the observation platform, the elderly man discovered lifeless in his seat, and finally, Mrs. Octavia Wentworth. 4 deaths, 4 tragedies. And yet, there is no curse upon this train. A ripple of unease moved through the passengers. Someone whispered, "Curse," but Poirot's voice cut sharply through the murmurs. No supernatural forces govern these events, only human nature and a man who knew well how to exploit fear for his own gain. His gaze shifted to Louis Garnier. The driver's face stiffened, but he did not move. "You, Mr. Garnier, are a man who detests society, who loathes the intrusion of passengers upon your solitude. Yet you chose a profession that forces daily contact with people. A contradiction, no?" Garnier's voice was clipped. "I drive the train. I do not entertain the tourists." "True, but you resent them. So you created a clever illusion. The man who died of a weak heart, a natural event, yet you whispered stories, shadows in the night, cold spots, mysterious noises. The woman who fell, intoxicated, yes, yet you let rumor transform tragedy into omen. Superstitious passengers spread tales and bookings fell. Empty corridors, quiet carriages, all for your peace. Clever, but not criminal." Poirot turned to the 4 suspects, his piercing gaze settling first on Evangeline. "Miss Wentworth, the letter you penned in anger was born of hurt, not malice. You sought reconciliation with your mother, not vengeance." Evangeline's composure cracked. Tears ran freely. "I never wanted her dead. I only wished she would see me, acknowledge me. The inheritance meant nothing compared to that." Poirot nodded. "Which is why you did not kill her. And you, Miss Chambers? Your concealment of dismissal from St. Margaret's? It was born of love misdirected, perhaps a forbidden attachment, but not of murderous intent." The nurse's shoulders slumped. "I was foolish, weak for a moment, but I loved Mrs. Wentworth. I served her with devotion." "And Dr. Stratford?" Poirot continued, turning to the physician. "Your love was genuine. Your schedule shows gaps, yes, but those hours were spent aiding a sick child in the 3rd-class carriages. Charity, hidden from the patient's knowledge." Stratford sagged with relief, though tension lingered. "Then who?" demanded one of the Manchester businessmen. "Who killed her?" Poirot's gaze fixed unflinchingly on Sir Cyril Montrose, who had remained silent through the morning. "You, Monsieur Montrose. You alone." Montrose's face was calm, almost incredulous. "Impossible. I was in the club car from 10 until midnight. Witnesses can confirm it." Poirot's tone was unyielding. "The tampering occurred at 8:45, before your alibi was established. Dr. Stratford prepared the 9 o'clock dose in his usual method. You, familiar with his routine from your medical studies, took advantage. You accessed the corridor, stopped by Mrs. Wentworth's compartment, picked the lock on the morphine case, and injected a fatal dose using a modified fountain pen, which you then discarded. The doctor unknowingly administered the lethal syringe at 9 o'clock. By the time of death at 11, your presence in the club car provided an airtight alibi." Montrose's protest faltered. "That's absurd. A pen. It cannot—" Poirot produced 2 fountain pens from his pocket, identical save for one crucial detail. "Observe, Monsieur Montrose. One bears your initials. The other, recovered from the lavatory waste bin, contains traces of morphine. One for appearances, one for murder. You studied medicine for 3 years before entering publishing, knowledge concealed until today." Colour drained from Montrose's face, grief giving way to panic. Poirot's narration continued, methodical, unflinching. "You intercepted Evangeline's letter at Casablanca. You planted it in Mrs. Wentworth's compartment, partially burned, to cast suspicion on the daughter. You timed the murder to coincide with her boarding, arranged excessive dosage to suggest mercy killing, and created an unbreakable alibi. Your greed, your obsession with profit, and your skill at deception culminated in a crime that transformed love and friendship into currency. Montrose bolted toward the observation platform. Years of training and instinct propelled Poirot faster. He tackled the publisher to the floor, restraining him as other passengers joined in. Within moments, Montrose was bound, his mask of compassion stripped away to reveal cold avarice beneath. The train slowed as Marrakesh station approached. On the platform, Moroccan police waited to take custody of a man who had turned death into profit, grief into theater, and friendship into a transaction. Justice, painstakingly assembled by the little grey cells, would finally be served. Chapter 6. Dawn over Marrakesh. The Marrakesh Express rolled into the station as dawn painted the city in soft hues of rose and gold, bathing the rooftops and minarets in a warm, delicate light. Moroccan police, crisp and efficient in their uniforms, boarded immediately, their presence transforming the bustling platform into a controlled scene of justice. Sir Cyril Montrose was taken into custody without resistance, his sullen silence reflecting the collapse of a carefully constructed facade. His elaborate performance, the mask of grief, charm, and feigned honesty, had finally ended. The body of Octavia Wentworth followed shortly thereafter, carried on a stretcher draped in white linen, destined for the city morgue, where a formal post-mortem would confirm the meticulous deductions Poirot had made aboard the train. Meanwhile, railway officials escorted Louis Garnier along the platform, not to imprisonment, but to dismissal. His manipulation of fear, while not directly causing physical harm, had inflicted financial and reputational damage on the railway company, and that alone warranted consequences. Dr. Stratford and Miss Chambers stood together, speaking quietly, the morning sunlight revealing lines of exhaustion etched across their faces. Yet, beneath that fatigue was something more subtle, a tentative understanding born of shared trials and mutual respect. The doctor's voice floated across to where Poirot and I observed from the carriage window. When this ordeal is over, after I have regained my composure, I shall provide proper references for you, Miss Chambers. You deserve a second chance. The nurse dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief, her expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Doctor, more than you know. Evangeline Wentworth lingered alone, clutching the leather portfolio that contained her mother's final manuscript. Tears had carved paths through her carefully applied makeup, leaving her face raw and human. Approaching the window, she spoke softly. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for uncovering the truth. I understand now that my mother's death was no fault of mine. Poirot inclined his head with his usual calm courtesy. And what will you do now, mademoiselle? He asked. I will ensure my mother's work reaches readers through an honest publisher. The proceeds will fund a foundation for cancer research. Some good must come from this tragedy. And... She hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. I wish I had sent the letter I meant to write. That regret will stay with me. Regret weighs heavy, Poirot replied gently, but you carry it with grace. She offered a small, sad yet genuine smile before disappearing into the flowing crowd of the station. 3 days later, we were settled in a Marrakesh hotel, the aftermath of the case behind us. On the terrace overlooking the winding Medina, steam rising from glasses of mint tea, we watched the city awaken. The call to prayer echoed across rooftops, a timeless reminder of human ritual and continuity. I broke the serene silence. Poirot, I confess, I suspected everyone but Montrose. His grief seemed too real to be false. Poirot's eyes twinkled with quiet satisfaction. Ah, mon ami, that is precisely the genius of such a murderer. He appears too innocent, too composed. Montrose understood the subtleties of human psychology, displaying measured emotion, cooperating politely, acknowledging his financial troubles, all to deflect suspicion. "And the second fountain pen?" I asked. When we discovered the body, Montrose's fingers bore fresh ink. By morning, the visible pen was clean. A man of his habits does not require a second pen for daily use, unless it serves another purpose entirely. Coupled with his background in medicine, the precise questions about morphine, post-mortem effects, and drug absorption all pointed to a knowledge hidden from the others. I watched a street vendor below meticulously stack oranges, each carefully placed, as Poirot continued. "He deceived us completely. Even you were misdirected toward the doctor because all evidence appeared to implicate him. When everyone looks in one direction, the detective must look elsewhere. This is the art of psychological misdirection. The manuscript, the contracts, the timing of Evangeline's boarding, the subtle placement of letters, all orchestrated, I observed. Exactly. Small details alone seem innocuous, but collectively they reveal the pattern. Montrose exploited human belief and perception, and Garnier amplified fear for his own ends. Two layers of manipulation, one myth, one murder, both intertwined. Poirot closed his eyes, listening to the melodic calls echoing across the city. This is the most dangerous type of murderer, not the impulsive killer of passion, nor the desperate killer of fear, but the calculating killer who camouflages avarice and cold-blooded intent beneath an exterior of humanity. Such a man sleeps soundly, believing and convincing others that he is incapable of wrongdoing. Justice, however, will follow him wherever he stands trial, Morocco, France, or England. The evidence leaves no doubt. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, while below, a storyteller's voice rose and fell in practiced cadence across the Medina. Tales within tales, blending fiction and truth, mirrored the events of our journey. Poirot's words resonated. Life is replete with coincidences. One man manipulates myth, the other exploits the human mind. One deceives with superstition, the other with greed cloaked in compassion. Two mysteries, not one. The lesson is this: humans see what comforts them, yet the little grey cells see beyond, to truth beneath appearance. The aroma of spices and orange blossoms wafted across the terrace, mingling with the crisp desert air. The midnight express to Marrakesh had etched another tale in Poirot's career, a story of layered deception, human frailty, and cunningly disguised malice. A reminder that the most convincing masks are those that appear entirely genuine. Here's a complete chapter-by-chapter analytical breakdown of the Midnight Express to Marrakesh. Chapter 1. A journey begins. The story opens aboard the Midnight Express, a luxury train cutting through the vast Moroccan desert under a crescent moon. The rhythmic clatter of wheels sets the tone for a night of concealed tensions. Among the elegantly dressed passengers, Poirot and Hastings are en route to Marrakesh when the peace is shattered by a subtle unease, a whispered argument between two travelers, a misplaced suitcase, and an unmistakable sense of foreboding. Poirot's curiosity is piqued, not by the grandeur of the train, but by human behavior, the faint tremor of fear in a stranger's voice. What we learn. Even in opulence, unease finds its place. The opening reminds us that appearances, no matter how polished, often conceal unrest. Moral theme. The smallest disturbances often herald the largest truths. Viewer question: have you ever sensed tension in a calm setting, something unspoken beneath the surface? Chapter 2. The first disturbance. A sudden scream slices through the stillness of the night. The train halts abruptly, its wheels screeching against the rails. A cabin door stands ajar, revealing the lifeless form of a wealthy French merchant, Monsieur Duval, a dagger protruding from his chest. Panic ripples through the passengers, their polite facades breaking. Poirot takes control, calming the crowd with his measured authority. He notes that the windows are locked from inside, the door bolted only moments before the scream. The impossible crime, the locked room mystery, has once again presented itself. What we learn: fear exposes character faster than confession. The way each passenger reacts tells Poirot more than words ever could. Moral theme: in crisis, truth leaks through instinct. Viewer question: if you were on that train, how would you have reacted? To help, to flee, or to hide? Chapter 3. The Suspects. Poirot and Hastings begin their inquiries, each interview revealing more than intended. Lady Vanden, the English aristocrat, hides nervous glances behind her pearls. The mysterious Colonel Navarro keeps his tone clipped and his eyes sharp. A young maid named Elise trembles, yet her fear seems rooted in something deeper than guilt. Poirot observes without judgment, cataloguing details. A faint scent of jasmine on one coat, the smudge of ink on another's cuff. As the night deepens, alliances form and fracture among the travelers, each with motive enough to kill. What we learn: motives are rarely single-threaded. They weave into complex patterns of desire, fear, and self-preservation. Moral theme: everyone carries a secret, but not all secrets are sins. Viewer question: do you think guilt always looks like guilt, or can innocence tremble too? Chapter 4. The clues in motion. Poirot returns to the scene of the crime, tracing the faint trail of evidence like a conductor reading a silent score. A misplaced ticket stub, a broken cufflink, and a drop of sealing wax become his instruments of deduction. Through them, he constructs an invisible timeline. The murder took place minutes before the scream, and the killer remained calmly aboard as panic spread. The train itself becomes a metaphor for truth in motion, unstoppable, precise, and enclosed. Each clue not only narrows the suspects, but reveals the human capacity for calculation under pressure. What we learn: truth is not found in isolation, but in sequence. Each clue carries weight only when connected to the rhythm of time. Moral theme: every lie has a structure. Break its pattern and the truth emerges. Viewer question: do you believe logic can truly decode human emotion, or does intuition still play its part? Chapter 5. Midnight Revelation. Under the dim glow of the carriage lamps, Poirot gathers all the passengers in the grand dining car. Outside, the desert stretches endlessly, a sea of shadow beneath the stars. With calm authority, he reconstructs the sequence of events: the merchant's fraud, the blackmail letter, the hidden debts. Piece by piece, he unmasks the killer, not the hardened colonel or the trembling maid, but Lady Vanden herself, driven by desperation to reclaim her ruined fortune. Her composure shatters as Poirot lays bare the logic of her act, her moral collapse as tragic as her crime. What we learn: the story reveals that desperation often disguises itself as dignity. Evil, in its quietest form, wears grace like perfume. Moral theme: pride, when cornered by ruin, turns even gentility into violence. Viewer question: do you think moral weakness can justify a crime when survival feels like the only choice? Chapter 6. The Dawn over Marrakesh. As the train glides toward Marrakesh, the rising sun paints the desert in hues of gold and rose. The passengers sit subdued, their silence heavy with understanding. Poirot reflects on the night's revelations. not triumphantly, but solemnly. Justice is done, yet he feels no victory, only the melancholy of knowledge. He remarks to Hastings that the desert, vast and endless, mirrors the human soul, capable of beauty, yet scarred by what it conceals. The train, once a vessel of luxury, becomes a moving confessional, carrying its survivors toward an uncertain peace. What we learn: resolution does not always bring comfort, truth cleanses, but it also scars. Moral theme: justice may restore order, but it cannot restore innocence. Viewer question: when truth is found, do you think it heals or merely ends the illusion? Key characters. Analysis. In the Midnight Express to Marrakesh, every character plays a distinct role in weaving deception, fear, and revelation across the confined luxury of a midnight train. Hercule Poirot stands as the unwavering force of logic and moral clarity. His intellect cuts through the layers of human frailty that unfold during the journey. Captain Hastings, his loyal companion, offers a humane counterbalance to Poirot's precision, grounding the investigation with empathy and insight into human vulnerability. Lady Vanden, the poised English aristocrat, hides desperation behind refinement, her elegance concealing the moral decay that propels the tragedy. Monsieur Duval, the murdered French merchant, is the spark that ignites the mystery, a man whose greed and deceit linger even beyond his death. Colonel Navarro, the enigmatic military man, embodies discipline and secrecy, representing the facade of control that crumbles under scrutiny. Elise, the timid maid, becomes a silent witness to the darker truths of power and manipulation, her innocence casting light on others' corruption. Inspector Renaud, the local authority who joins midway, mirrors the limits of procedure when faced with Poirot's psychological insight. Finally, the train itself, gliding through the moonlit desert, serves as a living symbol of confinement and inevitability, carrying each soul toward exposure and moral reckoning. Together, these figures transform a single night's journey into a study of pride, desperation, and the inescapable weight of truth. My final thoughts. At its core, The Midnight Express to Marrakesh is a reflection on how desperation can corrupt even the most polished facades. Beneath the elegance of candlelit dinners and velvet-lined compartments lies a human truth, that fear and greed often travel in disguise, wearing civility as a mask. Poirot's brilliance lies not in uncovering clues alone, but in exposing the quiet motives that drive ordinary people toward extraordinary sins. The story reminds us that no amount of wealth or refinement can silence the conscience, and that truth once revealed is both punishment and release. The dawn that breaks over Marrakesh symbolizes renewal, but not absolution. Justice has spoken, yet the weight of guilt remains. If this journey through mystery and morality intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe for more deep-dive analyses of timeless detective stories and share your thoughts below, because the most fascinating mysteries are the ones we continue to question together.